I may be friends on him in terms of on Facebook, but I know of him, maybe, but I don't really know him. And so we've got these crowd relationships, and there's this tension that kind of comes with this. Because what we're going to discover, and really what we discover actually in Jesus' story, is that the crowd, the tendency in the crowd is to constantly press itself, try to push itself into a seat of greater influence in our lives without paying the cost of greater investment in our lives. Stick with me on this. I remember when I was in Wisconsin, I love going and watching college football, and I got to go see a Wisconsin Badgers game, middle of winter, and the Wisconsin Badgers, their fans are crazy. And typically, right at the beginning of the fourth quarter, they do something that's kind of unique to them, is all of a sudden this song from the House of Pain comes on. It's the song Jump Around. And so the whole stadium, they start jumping around. They just start going crazy. And I used to always kind of wonder, like, why in the world did they do that? You know, I mean, minus the fact they're probably just totally drunk and intoxicated. But why do they do that? And I realized that there's a reason for it. And the reason is it's like 2 degrees at a Wisconsin Badgers football game. Like, if they didn't jump around and start moving, they would all die. I mean, it is so cold. In fact, I remember like ordering a hot chocolate, and within like a minute, it was chocolate milk. It was so cold there, and the whole time I'm praying. I'm just praying the game doesn't go into overtime. And that was one prayer that God didn't hear because for some reason, like, it went right into overtime. So, but I remember the whole time I'm at that game, and we're in the nosebleed seats. We're in the cheapest seats possible. Whole time though, I was just staring at these seats up in the front row. These seats, because they had basically these luxury boxes up in the front, and they're heated seats. And so while I'm suffering, like these guys, they're just like kicking back, it's warm. And there were a few kind of empty seats up there. Whole time, in my mind, I was just envisioning, what can I do to get down to these heated seats, which probably cost a fortune. But I'm like, man, I got to do what I can do to get down there. And listen, that's what the crowd does in our lives. That's what kind of the crowd of culture, the crowd of entertainment, the crowd of some of those kind of surface relationships of people around our lives, is they're constantly wanting to push for a place of influence without investment. Influence without investment, because that's really what the crowd is. The crowd in your life always has the least amount of investment in your life. They always have the least amount of an investment in your life. And here's where this can get dangerous, is when this crowd that has little to no investment in you is given influence, what happens is they can end up pushing out some of the people that matter most in your life. Again, that's what we see in the story. Mark 3:20 says, "Then Jesus entered a house, and again a crowd gathered, so that he and his disciples were not even able to eat." Like, he wasn't able to like really spend time with those who were closest to him, those who mattered most to him. And listen, when we allow culture to have a seat of influence without ever making any investment in our lives, when we give it that place, again, what happens is it can do the exact same thing. People with the least amount of investment in you ultimately end up getting the greatest amount of investment in them. And in fact, we see this, think about this, when you're at home, and how often so many of us will just, rather than interacting with our family or interacting with our kids or interacting with our wife, we'll just spend the whole time on the phone or on the computer checking out our Facebook. Just, getting our update. How's it going? Oh, that's fine. Or guys, like Sports Center. We'll just watch all the Sports Center highlights, kind of listening to that voice of influence, a voice of culture of sports stars, and we just get enveloped in it. Never taking the time to really, again, grow that relationship with the people that matter most. And as a result, we allow culture to press into us to the point where it pushes out the people who matter most. Amen. And look, I get it. That's just me. You guys never do that. I know that, But listen, that's what the crowd can do if you allow it to kind of push in on you. How about this? How about in terms of dating relationships? You're kind of the danger of, I guess, of when we give a place of influence and even intimacy to a group of people who have little to no investment into our lives. Think about this as singles. When It's amazing how many singles I'll talk to, and it's like, man, I don't understand why it just seems like I move from one bad relationship to the next, and you find ourselves, kind of running to one relationship, one dysfunctional relationship after the next. We seem to have the wrong person in the seat with us in our life time and time again. And listen, I wonder if part of the reason is because we've never made room for the right person by allowing the wrong person to sit in there, because we allow them to stick in there. We give them a seat of intimacy and influence without any investment in our lives. We'll sit there and we'll allow that intimacy. We'll give the very best of ourselves, the very best of our time, the very best of who we are to someone who's never made any investment to us. And yet the Bible sits there and kind of flips the script on that. It's like, no. If you want to really develop and find Mr. Right or Mrs. Right in your life and really develop a healthy relationship, you got to reverse that. You got to look, no. Hey, listen, you get intimacy and you get influence after you make an investment. Like you want in this circle, in the inner circle, hey, listen, you don't get in this circle until you're willing to invest in this circle. Until you're willing to make an investment, until you're willing to commit. I think the great theologian Beyonce said, listen, if you like it, you better put a ring on it, right? I mean, again, you got to, so often we get in so much trouble when we give influence or intimacy to somebody who's never made investments. Even in leadership. This might come to surprise you, but after all these years of being a pastor and doing church, I've come to discover a lot of people have a lot of opinions on how church should be done and how you should do it and how you should go about it. Amen. A lot of people. And it's not a bad thing. I think it's great, but what I've learned over the years is that the voices I've come to learn to really listen to the most are the voices that I can look at and I can see somebody who's made an investment. Like one of the first questions I ask myself when someone is sharing a great idea, no matter how great it is, hey, listen, are they invested? Are they actually plugged into a small group? Are they actually serving on a team? Are they actually giving? I mean, is there a level of investment? See, I think for some of you, one of the most life-changing things you could do in your life is to sit there and really take assessment of the relationships in your life and really look at, hey, when it comes to who I'm giving the most influence to in my life, are they people that are making an investment in my life? Listen, the greater the investment, then the greater the influence, the greater the intimacy. But it doesn't work the other way around. And listen, let me be clear on this too. Before you start thinking this is like some rant against culture or the crowd, hey, look, we should be a part of the crowd. We should be a part of the world. We should be, investing and being a part of the world around us, culture around us. Don't get me wrong on that. But what I'm saying is that when it comes to influence and it's got to come not from the outside in, but it's got to come from the inside out. It's got to come from the inside out. In fact, Romans 12:2 speaks of this very thing when it says, don't let the world around you squeeze you into its mold, but let God remold your minds from within. I love that. It's got to come from the inside out. And again, it all comes back to this, are they invested? Listen, hey, it's great to be a part of the world, be a part of the crowd, to be a light, as Paul says at the end of Philippians chapter 2, to be a witness. But listen, the key to that is you've got to be the influencer, not the one influenced. And so often we kind of allow the world to be the driving force that influences us, when in reality that influence has got to come from the inside out. It's got to start with that relationship with our Father. It's got to start with the one who has made the greatest investment in your life and who in turn should have the greatest influence in your life. The one who paid the ultimate price on the cross 2,000 years ago and who should have the ultimate say when it comes to your life, right? And so that's kind of the first dynamic we see there. We see this crowd, but here's the second one we see is we see the crew. And if the crowd is low investment, low intimacy, low influence, the crew is great investment, great intimacy, and great influence. Or you could say high investment, high intimacy, high influence. These are people who know you. more than just know about you, like they actually know you. These are the Timothys. These are the Epaphroditus. These are Jesus' disciples. They know you. There's a friendship there. There's a relationship there. And listen, here's where the relationship with the crew is so essential in our lives is because, listen, your crew will ultimately determine your course. Your crew will determine your course. Or you could put it another way. You show me your friends and I'll show you your future, right? You show me your friends, and I will show you your future. Stephen Covey wrote in his book, Highly Influential People, he said, you are the average of the top 5 people you spend time with. That's so true. You are the average of the top 5 people you spend with. And listen, this is more than just some positive self-help stuff. This is biblical advice we're talking about. Look at what Proverbs 13:20 says. Whoever walks with the wise becomes wise, but the companion of fools will suffer harm. Listen, your crew, it matters who's in your crew. It matters that you get the right people in the right seats in your life. In fact, going back to that story in Mark chapter 3, again, notice when Jesus, he comes down from this mountain experience, listen again, he immediately surrounds himself with godly community. And I love this picture because here's the thing is you can come into church, you can have a mountaintop experience, you can have a moment where God just meets you in a powerful, transformative way. But listen, if you leave the mountaintop and you go back into the valley, you go back into your everyday life and you don't have a good crew around you, listen, it doesn't matter how much you pray. It doesn't matter how hard you worship. I'm telling you, without the right crew around you, without some godly support system around you, listen, it's not going to last very long. You've got to have some people around you who will encourage you, who will walk with you, especially during tough times. In fact, I like how Psalm 142:7 puts it, how David, again, trying to come out of a very tough spot, a very difficult time in his life. He says, bring my soul out of prison so that I may give thanks for your name. The righteous will surround me, for you will deal bountifully with me. Again, it's so important that you and I surround ourselves with a godly community, with getting the right people in the right seat. And again, when I say that, I'm not talking about perfect people, but people who are constantly pushing us, promoting, and moving us closer in our relationship with Jesus. And so just real quick, some crew criteria here. Like, well, what does that mean? What does it really look like? How do I know if I've got a good crew in my life? Well, one is they reciprocate my effort. They reciprocate my effort. Listen, Mark 3:13. Jesus went up on a mountainside and called to him those he wanted, and they came to him. I find that interesting. Here's Jesus. Again, he doesn't need anything from anybody. I mean, he could be totally self-sufficient. I mean, he's the Son of God. And yet, even at that, he still calls them up. He calls this community, his crew, he calls them to come up the mountain, to have to make their way up the mountain, to actually have to put some sweat into this, actually have to put some energy into this, to actually have to put some effort into this. In fact, I put it in my notes this way, is listen, when it comes to the relationships, and how do you know if they're really the crew in your life or not, one of the best ways you can kind of determine that is listen, to not let anyone sit in your circle who wasn't willing to climb up the mountain, who wasn't willing to invest a little bit of time into your life, a little bit of effort, a little bit of grace. Listen, so many of us, when it comes to the community in our lives, it's like the only people that are closest to us are people we're constantly trying to drag forward, trying to pull, trying to motivate. And we think, oh, maybe if I just do a little bit more, they'll love me back a little bit more. Or if I just give a little more, they'll do a little bit more for me, or whatever the case is. But we're constantly trying to drag people. But listen, in your life, you need a crew. You need some people sometimes in your life who are willing to drag you when you don't feel like you've got the energy to move forward, when you don't maybe feel like you've got the passion or the energy or even the time to show up to a church service and show up. Hey, listen, I'm the pastor, and there's times where I need people to drag me to church. I need my wife to sit there and say, no, you need to preach. You need to get out there. You need some people in your life who don't just, constantly just taken from your life, but they're constantly, they're exerting, they're giving back some, they're reciprocating some of the effort. Again, it's never going to be 50-50 even all the way, but they need to be exerting some effort. They need to be putting something into the relationship. Second thing is they celebrate my success. They celebrate my success. Mark 3:21-22 says, when his family heard about this, they went to take charge of him, for they said, he's out of his mind. And the teachers of the law who came down from Jerusalem said, he's possessed by Beelzebub. Now, you're probably thinking, well, that is just really weird. But just to kind of put that in a little context here. So this crowd's gathered. They start accusing him of some things and trying to basically call him some names and try to say, oh, well, you're not, who you say you are, because mostly they just didn't like what they were hearing. And it's interesting because it wasn't just the teachers of the law that were kind of coming against him. But notice in here, it actually says his family did the same. Because what you got to understand is that his brothers, with his family, what he's talking about is the brothers of Jesus, they didn't come to really believe he was the Son of God until later on. Now, later on, they would come to believe. You think of like James and go to write the book of James. And I mean, they would go on to be incredible supporters and encouragement and incredible witnesses to Jesus. But early on, they weren't that. Early on, they were right there with the teachers like, oh yeah, well, maybe you're right. Maybe he is a little crazy. And listen, I bring that up to you is because, listen, there'll always be critics in your crowd, but they don't need a place in your crew. There'll always be critics in your crowd, but they don't need a place in your crew. Listen, you're in trouble when those who are supposed to be in your crew are saying the same things about you and who you are as those in the crowd. If they're constantly tearing you down or draining the life out of you or speaking things that are contrary to what God has spoken into your life, listen, you're in trouble at that point. You got to have people in your life who again will speak encouragement, will speak faith, will speak life into you. In fact, I put it in my notes this way: is that you can't be around negative people all the time and have a positive life. You can't be around negative people all the time and have a positive life. You can't constantly within your inner circle just have people who are resentful or constantly tearing you down or speaking the negative stuff of your life or pulling out or focusing on the negative of your life rather than speaking words of faith in your life all the time. Which leads to the third thing, kind of checklist of how do I know if I got the right crew in my life, which is this, is that they invigorate my faith. They invigorate my faith. Verse 35, whoever does God's will is my brother and sister and mother. So after this has all happened, Jesus, kind of calls him over and he says, hey, listen, you want to know who's really in my crew? It's not the people I inherited. It was the people that intentionally are supporting, the people who are intentionally encouraging, the people who are walking with me. Amen. See, Jesus, what's interesting about this, Jesus redrew his crew based on intentional relationships, not inherited ones. And this is important because for some of us, the reason we feel stuck is because we've got a crew that again is the opposite of all this. We got a crew who, and we kind of keep them around because, well, they've always been my friend. I've always known them. And yet we wonder why it feels like we're constantly stuck in mediocrity. It feels like we're not growing any closer in our relationship with Jesus. We're not growing or getting any closer to the call God's put on our life. And listen, I just maybe wonder if for some of us, the change in our life that we so want to see, just maybe, if it actually starts with a change in our crew. A change in some of those relationships with some of those people who are closest to us. Because your crew will determine your course. It matters. And that's what Jesus really understood. He understood the importance of, listen, I'm going to be intentional about this. A good, godly community doesn't just happen. They don't just drift into your life. Like you've actually got to be intentional about it. You've got to put some effort into it. You've actually got to get into some places where that kind of community can form and develop. I remember in Oklahoma, whenever I'd go fishing, they'd always tell us, hey, the quality of the fish is determined by the quality of the pond. Listen, you want to find some good, community, people who are praying for you, people who are encouraging you. Listen, it starts by being faithful and showing up, being involved in a church community. It starts by getting involved in small groups. It starts by getting involved in a serve team. You've got to, it doesn't just happen. You got to be intentional about it. You got to be intentional about surrounding yourself. I like how Hebrews 10:24 puts it when it says when it comes to the community, godly community around our lives, we need people in our lives that stir up one another to love and good works. Some translations say provoke. When you look at the people closest to you, what do they provoke you to do? Are they provoking you to a closer walk with Jesus? Do they provoke you to get into his word? Do they provoke you to take those steps of faith? Like when you're around them, do you feel like you're driven to want to serve more? Do you feel like you're driven to want to love more, driven to have more compassion for the world around you? What do they provoke you to do? What do they inspire you to do? What do they lead you to do? It's so important that you get the right crew around you. In fact, just real quickly here, again, when we opened up this message, I said my prayer for you is that you would start to develop some names of some people, that if they're not already in your crew, that those names will start to kind of pop up in your mind of a realization that, listen, these are people I need to maybe invite in my crew. I need to invest more in these relationships. I need to spend more time in these relationships. In fact, there was a great book called The Hope Quotient by Ray Johnston. I encourage you, if you've never read it, to get a copy. It's a great book. But he talks about the 5 essential relationships